When we talk about the Idaho 4 case, what a lot of people wonder is, what was the motive? What was the reason? What was the connection? And a lot of people seem to think that because, as of right now, we have been led to believe that there was no connection between the suspect and the victims, and because we can't determine a motive, because without a connection, then a lot of people seem to think, well, then how could there be a motive? So a lot of people feel as though the current suspect could not be guilty because there's no connection that we know of, and therefore no motive. And I want to talk about how incredibly wrong that is. I was watching Harsh Reality today. I've linked to him in the description. Go follow him. And he said that for him, it's really important to know the reason. There needs to be a reason for him. There needs to be a motive. And I get that, because we're trying to figure this out, right? It's very hard for our brain to process this when there's so many open-ended questions going on. So I get that. And because this just feels like an ongoing puzzle that our brain is desperately trying to solve and can't. And I think that's part of what is fueling us to continue on down these rabbit holes and doing research and watching videos. Our brains have not been able to find the last few missing pieces of the puzzle, those being motive, reason, evidence. I want to talk about why motive doesn't necessarily have to be something obvious, and that there doesn't necessarily need to be any kind of connection between the killer and the suspects. Now, I've said before in many previous videos, I predicted early on they would not find a connection. This is a smart guy. He knows what police are going to be looking for. He's going to know what kind of trail to lead and not lead. So I believe that they wouldn't find a connection. But they don't need one. And that's, I think, something that people are having a really hard time wrapping their brain around. That he doesn't need a connection. That a connection could have been established that night, the night before, a week before. That it didn't have to be something ongoing that built, that escalated. This very easily could have been what they call a thrill kill. And I'm going to post a link to a couple of articles in the description that talk about the psychology of thrill kills. Because thrill kills, the thrill, that's the reason. And it doesn't have to be something that people can determine or point to. It's not something necessarily that's tangible. Sometimes it's just something that's important to the person committing the crime. And a thrill kill, as one of the articles, the Psychology Today article states, you know, what's so important to people who commit thrill kills is that even the planning for this crime gives them the adrenaline that actually committing the crime does. In fact, they say the planning and the lead up becomes like a narcotic drug to the person committing the crime. Now, considering who's currently in custody, that kind of tracks, doesn't it? That somebody a former addict who probably does have a craving for that kind of high, could have just been trying to replace that high. And that's not, I'm not saying he was trying to replace that high, so he decided, hey, I'm just going to kill some people. I think he was being fueled by a craving. This article also went on to say that thrill killers are often narcissistic perfectionists, and that typically leads them to try and commit the perfect crime. Now, if you're familiar with this case, then you know that the current suspect, they have a background in criminology. They were going for their PhD in criminology. They had I think their master's in criminal justice. Their undergrad was in psychology. We know that he applied for an internship with the Pullman Police Department and didn't get it. You know, this could be his attempt to show the police he's smarter than them, that they made a mistake. But given his background, I could see him trying to commit the perfect murder, or thinking that he would be capable of committing the perfect murder. And like anything else, you can only plan so much. You can't plan for the unforeseen, meaning You can't plan for a dog barking. And that too. And like people say, oh, well, he must have been stalking the house. Well, if he had been stalking the house, wouldn't he have known that there was a dog there? If he had been stalking the house, wouldn't he have known how many people lived in it? How many people to be prepared for? You know, the dog is a big one. Why wouldn't he be expecting a dog? If I were going to go into a house to unalive 4 people, I probably would choose one that didn't have a dog that was potentially going to bark at any minute that I wouldn't be able to control. See, that's why I don't think he had been stalking them for very long. I don't think he was really familiar with how many people live there. I think his choice was the house, and choosing that house and driving around that house. I think probably, you know, not only was he driving around to find a parking spot, but I think driving around it increased the craving and the urge that he needed to commit this crime. So, and that's saying whoever was in that Elantra. Maybe it's the current suspect, maybe it's not. But thrill killers, this is why they do it. They do it for the satisfaction and the thrill of the hunt. And I could see him stalking that house a little bit here and there, or having been driving around all those times late at night, early in the morning, hunting, looking for a victim. All of that is part of the thrill kill process. And it gives them a rush, a similar rush to drugs. From the very beginning, I always assumed this was some kind of thrill kill. That whoever did it to get off on the fear. And they say that with thrill kills, they're often committed by somebody who feels inadequate in some way, or who wants to feel power. Now, depending on who it is, doesn't necessarily have to be the suspect. I think whoever did it is somebody that wasn't successful with women, and that this crime was their way of exacting revenge on women in general, and that they went in at the time that they did. They wanted their victims to be at their most vulnerable, because that would increase their high. And again, doesn't have to be the current suspect, because unfortunately drug addiction is very common. I think whoever did it, whether it's Koberger or not, I think it is probably somebody who could have a history of addiction, and who was, you know, a lot of times addicts, when they get clean, they transfer addictions, or they still battle those demons, they still battle those urges. So I could see it being somebody who had those urges and had those impulses and had impulse control issues and couldn't fight them. And this was how they were going to fulfill that need, by killing women. Again, doesn't necessarily have to be the person who's currently in jail, but I think it was definitely someone who disliked women and who wanted to who was very awkward around them, felt very inadequate, and so he killed women to feel more powerful, and because he wanted them to feel fear. They wanted their victims to fear them. That's part of the rush. So if we're going to talk about motive and reason and where does this come from, you know, thrill killers, their victims are typically strangers, and there's a little bit of there's often some stalking leading up to it, but that stalking doesn't have to be for weeks. It could be, you know, an hour, just to get a sense. And remember what I said. I think it's very strange that if he was stalking that house and stalking those women, that he didn't know that there was a dog in the house. That's a big one for me. Like, why would he go in there if he knew there was a dog that he was going to have to contend with? But in any case, thrill killers, they typically go for strangers. There's some stalking as part of the process that kind of helps get them off. And they do it to feel powerful, and that could be the motive, and that could be the reason. And there doesn't necessarily need to be a personal connection. He could have just decided, whoever it was, I want to kill women. That was the reason. That's the connection. I want to know in the comments. 1, do you think he knew that a dog was in the house? Do you think he was stalking the house long enough to know that there was a dog in the house? 2, what do you think his motive or his reason was? Tell me in the comments.